They have had to rethink their strategy and recast their tactics in response to the challenging societal context. With us today are four leaders, the recent chairman of the two unions. The Honorable Pat Schroeder was chairman of the English-Speaking Union of the United States from 2009 to 2013. She was a U.S. representative from Colorado from 1973 to 1996. And before being elected to Congress, she obtained a law degree from Harvard, and she practiced as a lawyer in private practice and then served on the National Labor Relations Board from 1964 to 1966. She also worked as a teacher from 1969 to 1972 and was elected as a Democrat to the 93rd and to the 11 succeeding Congresses from January 3rd, 1973 to January 3rd, 1997. She was a national advocate for women and families and a tireless supporter of women's rights. We also have Mr. Miles Young, the current chair of the English-Speaking Union of the Commonwealth. Mr. Young participated in ESU's public speaking competition as a schoolboy. He succeeds Professor Raven, who we also have with us today, as the chair of the Board of Trustees of the English-Speaking Union of the Commonwealth. Mr. Young began his career in advertising, progressing to become chair and CEO of Ogilvy and Mather, a leading global communications network. More than half of his working life has been spent outside the United Kingdom, in China, and then in North America. He returned to the UK in 2016 to take up his current post as warden of New College, Oxford, his alma mater. He is a passionate advocate of listening and speaking skills and is keen to ensure that the most disadvantaged in our society have access to the experience and training that the ESU uniquely offers. Professor James Raven was chairman of the Board of Trustees of the English-Speaking Union of the Commonwealth from 2019 to 2021 and is currently serving as deputy chairman. He is a fellow at Magdalen College, Cambridge, and professor of history at the University of Essex. As a writer, academic, and broadcaster specializing in literary culture, an internationally recognized authority in the history of the book, and a past and present fellow of 2 Cambridge and 1 Oxford colleges, Professor Raven has a long-standing involvement in promoting international educational, scholarship, and partnership schemes and membership engagement. Professor Raven has been a member of the ESU since 1977, when he took up the first of 2 United States, United Kingdom ESU visiting fellowships, later serving on various regional, national, and international ESU committees, and as a visitor to numerous United States and United Kingdom ESU branches. And finally, we have His Excellency Dr. Paul Beresford-Hill, Chairman of the English-Speaking Union of the United States. Dr. Beresford-Hill is a distinguished international educator who holds postgraduate degrees from both Oxford University, United Kingdom, and Columbia University in New York. He is currently ambassador of the Permanent Observer Mission of the Sovereign Order of Malta to the United Nations, and also leads the Mountbatten Institute, a business school which specializes in international training and internships. Dr. Beresford-Hill was elected chairman of the English-Speaking Union in 2015. He accepted the English-Speaking Union Founders Award in 2015 for his role in launching the ESU National Shakespeare Competition. In 2018, Dr. Beresford-Hill was honored by Queen Elizabeth with an appointment as Honorary Commander of the British Empire for his contribution to international education and British-American cultural relations. In 2020, Dr. Beresford-Hill was awarded the inaugural Princess Anne Princess Royal Award, an international award approved by the British Cabinet to recognize significant contributions to the English-Speaking Union in its wider global setting. So today we asked our distinguished guests to consider several questions about their tenure at the English-Speaking Union. Number 1, when they were elected chair, had they already been involved with the English-Speaking Union, or was this a brand new endeavor for them? And what compelled them to take this charge on? Number 2, were they familiar with the ESU's mission, culture, and programs, or was this a steep learning curve? Number 3, how did they perceive the ESU's mission at the start of their tenure? Number 4, how did this perception change by the end of their term? What were the biggest outside and internal challenges they had to contend with? And finally, how did they address these challenges? They will try to answer these questions and share with us insights about how their personal understanding of Sir Evelyn's vision inspired them to take the ESU to new heights of relevance and impact, and challenges they faced during their journey.
Well, thanks everybody, and I wish I could be there to be on the panel. Life gets in the way while you're making plans, so what can I say? But anyway, I'm delighted you're having this discussion about leadership and the ESU and where it's going. It's obviously changing to fit the times. We all have to fit the times, whether we like it or not. The times change. But I think it's probably become even more important than we ever thought it would be. And one of the reasons I feel so strongly about it is what we're seeing in our country and in many countries is so much focus on STEM, in other words, science, technology, math, and universities are doing away with an awful lot of the arts courses. Many students are almost afraid to take an arts course for fear that will interfere with their ability to make money later on in life or whatever it is that gets them. So I think that the focus that the ESU has had on Shakespeare, on literature, on English literature, all of that is terribly important. And, one of the things that I got so excited about when I was leading it was I started out with this vision of it was supposed to be about the English-speaking countries coming together and forming this union. And yes, that's still very important. Australia, New Zealand, the UK, of course, which is the great bedrock, are all part of it. But when I went to some of the international meetings and found out how enthusiastic people were in Portugal and all sorts of places, and then when Albania invited us to come there, Albania, because they wanted to make English the official second language of Albania, you suddenly realize that all sorts of places in the world were trying to become English speaking, and this is getting to be more and more important every single day. I realize now that people wanted to be in the English speaking union because they wanted the ability to learn more and to maybe come here and maybe interface with some of us. And meanwhile, we have traditionally always been trying to encourage exchanges with teachers, with students, with all sorts of people, and our own students, trying to get them enthusiastic about Shakespeare. I remember those wonderful, wonderful times in New York when all the winners of the Shakespeare contest came together, and you just got chills. It was fantastic. Then I was so proud too that for a while, and maybe it's still going on, I'm not sure, but the New York group started bringing in new residents that were living in New York that wanted to practice English more and could do that at the headquarters there. All of those things I think are just terrific experiences. There was even a movie, and I have spent all day trying to think of what that movie was, but about 5 or 10 years ago, it was a movie in some other country, but the ESU was in it because the people in the movie, I think it was either Germany or somewhere, is where the actors were pretending to be Germans, but nevertheless, they had the ESU as part of the thing that they were proud of joining. So, we've got a whole new global vision, I think. And of course, after I retired, I've had the great privilege of now being affiliated with the Central Florida branch. And of course, they had the blessings of this wonderful woman, last name Drew, Jessie Drew, who left them $5 million. Can you imagine? Or $2 million, I'm sorry, 25 years ago, but it has now grown to $5 million. And they use it for all sorts of education purposes. They're so critical here in this Central Florida area. They run these Shakespeare camps for children in the 9th to 12th grade every summer. And then they also run one for children who are disabled or who have some kind of learning disability. They run a Shakespeare camp. And this year, they're given $100,000 in scholarships. So every year, they've taken that money, which has now grown to $5 million, as I said before, but they've taken 5% of it out and used it for all these educational purposes to help teachers, to help students, and to really continue to get people excited and enthusiastic about the arts. That is very hard to do in this big push that we all have to be more tech oriented, more this oriented, more math oriented, more space oriented. And we kind of forget the human part of it, the human arts and music and all the things that go along with it. So I was very proud to be part of the ESU, and still I'm proud to be part now of the Central Florida ESU. And I wish everybody could get the money that the Central Florida ESU has gotten, because I know how hard you all work and how hard it is to raise funds for these things now, because it's such a different day. But thank you very much. And it was an absolute delight to be able to talk to you. Good luck and go for it. All right.
Good day. I want to apologize for not being able to be with you today in person or on video live. So please accept this as both an apology, but also an introduction. I was very proud to be elected chair of the English-speaking union in this country earlier in the year during the height of the pandemic. It was, of course, a very difficult time to move in, mostly because we were unable to meet in person until a few weeks ago. But already I've got a sense of the vitality and the potential of the ESU and of the wonderful work done by our volunteers and our members. My first engagement with the ESU was way back in 1971 when I was at school in Bedford, and I entered the Bedfordshire local county public speaking competition. And I won a prize, and I still have that prize with me here in Oxford, which is a battered copy of Roget's Thesaurus, which reminds me of how much that speaking competition gave me the confidence, which I didn't otherwise have, to speak, to argue, and indeed, most importantly, to listen. Right now, I'm in my lodgings in New College, Oxford, where I'm the warden. It's a very strange title. I moved here from the United States in 2016, and my American friends thought I'd joined the prison service or parking service or something like that. But the word warden really means kustos in Latin. It means guardian, someone who looks after the foundation, which in our case goes back to 1379, and the students and the academics who live and work within it. Being in an academic institution gives me a particular interest in oracy, that rather strange word, which I think is becoming increasingly important. We had a meeting of our ESU board very recently, which was our first physical meeting, and it was held here in New College. We spent some time talking about oracy because we're pleased to see that it is beginning to attract some political interest. So the All-Party Parliamentary Group recently published a report on oracy, which demonstrated the extent to which it is still being widely neglected in schools. I think we believe that we will never make a major inroad into the issue until oracy is properly integrated into the syllabus and measured as an output. But what we did do is to think about it in context of the other 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. As one of our board members put it, oracy really is the 4th R. One of the attractive things about Evelyn Wrench was that as a young boy at Eton, obviously very privileged, he went to the Hampton Wick facility, which they had, which was a kind of outreach facility for underprivileged kids in the East End of London. And he was horrified. He actually used the word pigsties to describe the conditions in which people lived at the time. And he wrote afterwards that he found it very difficult to understand how a great empire could tolerate the existence of living conditions like that. Well, underprivilege still exists in our societies, however developed they are. And one of the things which particularly exercises us is how the ESU can start to lay foundation skills at the beginning of the educational progress of an individual, which would then lead in a form of a continuum to the sorts of high-level competitions and skills-based events which have become our hallmark. So as we look to the ending of the pandemic and the return to normality, we're also looking at the impact which the pandemic had on schools, where kids were kept locked up at home for a very long time and had missed a large amount of socialization and all that involves in terms of speaking and listening skills. We committed ourselves as a board to direct our educational programs more energetically and in a more sustained way against delivering oracy in schools which are underprivileged and where there is a strong sense of educational deprivation. I am very motivated by that mission. I'm also motivated by the idealism which I still believe runs through the DNA of this English-speaking union. And that is that while patriotism is a very, very decent and important sentiment in many, many countries, Evelyn Wrench saw it as something that could be transcended and focused on the ultimate goal, which is universal peace and universal understanding. I hope very much that we, as a group of enthusiasts for that mission, can seek to have some impact on the world as it evolves through what is a particularly dangerous phase in its history. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to meeting you in person soon. Good day.
Professor Raven and Dr. Beresford Hill are with us in person this afternoon. So we'll start with Professor Raven.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a joy and a privilege to be speaking with you. Apologies for my voice. I have a heavy cold. But more than that, you actually find me in a somber mood because, as you may have heard, this lunchtime, just a few hours ago, one of our British MPs, parliamentarian, David Amess, was murdered. Joe Cox, another MP, was killed 5 years ago in the closing days of the EU referendum. David Amess, who died today, was someone I knew. I stood for Parliament 3 times in a seat that was nearby to his, and he was a lovely man with whom politically I profoundly disagreed, but who was an extraordinarily gentle and kind public servant. And it's a terrible testament to our divided society that this tragedy, this outrage, should happen. You can very much disagree with someone, but you can still be friends and learn from them as well. And that will be something that I want to come back to about my time as chairman of the ESU and what I tried to do when I was chairman. But let me start, because this is a key to my appreciation of Evelyn Wrench, by saying that the ESU, when I joined it 40 years ago, and I immediately, Miles Young showed you his book that he won, and I found just here on my shelves immediately my little trophy for winning a speaking competition from 1976. And from that, I came, as your president said, to the US on a fellowship, and it gave me a deep love of the American people and of the United States. And that, of course, is part of what Evelyn Wrench and his associates, Walter Hines Page and others, hoped for when they set up the ESU. And not just, as indeed Miles and Pat were saying, not just the United States, but those speaking English all over the world. And from my background in particular, had never been abroad, was from a very sheltered background, the ability to travel and to understand, and that understand others and to share that cultural experience widely. And that's always underpinned my vision of the ESU and why I've worked for it as a charity. But before I detail that, let me just talk about two things, or mention two things, because I am a historian here and a professor in Cambridge. There are two challenges. You asked us about two challenges, and there are two interesting challenges at the back because of our minds, because it's easy today to be able to pull out some extracts from Evelyn Wrench's writings, which are a little uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable in some quarters because of what he was talking about in the terms of Anglo-Saxonism, of his interest in Englishness and race, and indeed in his terminology of the word union. But I do think that's a huge mistake to do so, because as we've heard from others, he was a man of great vision, I love the term that was used there, practical idealist. And in many ways, he was a progressive. He was a man, though, of his time, and we have to remember that. His values were right values, and his sayings were extraordinary, I think. And the one that I, perhaps as a touchstone for my work in the ESU and for my leadership, was that he said this, international relations should not be left to governments alone. He was, I think, an extraordinary progressive man whose intentions were sincere and honourable, and embody values that are so important today. It is an interesting time, of course, to think about when it was. Again, as a historian, it's interesting, a time to think about when the ESU was founded, because here we had, after the First World War, the United States coming to terms, I think, with being a world power and how to operate in the world in a new way, while the British Empire was looking at a very different future and the way in which it was going to be federated. And the idea of union itself was fascinating, but the emphasis was very much put on English-speaking peoples, and why I think you were so wise, if I may say so, in the introduction to this particular session, to stress English-speaking peoples, which of course was in the title of Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples of the World. In future, we do have a further challenge, I think, and that is to think about how our union goes forward. There is, of course, under the Charter, the ESU of the United States, the ESU of the Commonwealth, as Pat Schroeder said so well, includes all sorts of countries which are not in the British Commonwealth, from Chile to Portugal and Japan, many other European countries, and Russia, the wonderful ESU based in St. Petersburg. And so in future, we do have to think about how we might work closely to an association of English-speaking peoples, which goes beyond the boundaries of nations, as Evelyn Wrench said. But back to Wrench himself, there were three foundations, I think, for us all, based in our respective charters. We are educational, we are international, and we are associational. That is, we have members. And I think that's how Wrench and the founders saw it. And those three things were a key in my thinking about the leadership, that we were educational and agreeing entirely with what Miles has just said in promoting the work that we do for young people, both participatory and competitive, but that we're also international and that we're also associational, which gives us this opportunity to reassert Evelyn Wrench's understanding, particularly in terms of promoting greater global understanding and tolerance. So that progressive vision was extremely important to me, based on the openness and respect and the love of the language which I found in the United States. But in my time as chairman specifically, there were really two main broader challenges. The first was, and still is, I say, on a particularly somber day like today, of our increasingly polarized societies at home and abroad. And the second was the somewhat surreal and disastrous intervention of the pandemic, which has changed all our lives. Well, the first, of course, we face very real challenges in our ESU wrench vision of this polarized society, of less respectful interventions in a deeply troubled world, which is hugely fractious in Europe as well as in the US over a vast range of issues, over racial tension, migration, religious divisions, and major global confrontations. Now, in our speaking competitions and our work in the classrooms, we've tried to bring people, young people especially, together to debate and listen to each other respectfully. And in our branches and our international issues, we similarly hold speaker meetings and similar events for young people so that they know how to engage with respect and politeness and civility. So the challenge really was how to advance that against the backdrop of what seemed to be radically changing standards of public debate and discourse. And we can all think about how aggressive some of the social media broadcasts have become, how people in general have become ruder in their interventions, more intransigent. And we can all think of particular examples of that, particularly over the last few years. But just as we were tackling those sorts of range of issues relating to membership, to governance, to educational strategy under my chairmanship, within 6 months, we faced the pandemic lockdown. And so our important work in schools and indeed our events, participative and competitive, were all suspended. Our members, like your members, I suppose, couldn't meet together either personally. Classrooms became online, and although we're marvelously picking up on this again there, we couldn't then intervene in the classroom, too much going on for teachers as well. So one of our great endeavours at that time was our Festival of Speaking, an online festival which brought hundreds of contributions. It was sponsored by a wonderful team of volunteers, and I certainly encouraged it. I can't claim in any way personal responsibility, but it was an extraordinary success, and it showed, I think, the way forward with our use of digital technology. The two particular things, personal things, that I was able to do in terms of making a positive out of a negative, that is to promote online work, was first of all to be able to move the Evelyn Wrench lecture, our annual lecture, online, which went ahead. And Lady Brenda Hale, the first woman to be president of the UK Supreme Court, accepted my invitation to give that lecture, as did, and we've been hearing about in the introduction to this, Wrench's Irish roots, as did Mary McAleese, the former president of Ireland, who will be giving the Evelyn Wrench lecture in what we will now deem a hybridity, that is both in person at Dartmouth House and online in a few weeks' time. And then I launched a popular civility series, as it was called, over 4 months, for debate and discussion online to enthuse a large audience. And I can just give a sample of that, I think, in a couple of minutes here. The first session we had was to ask about the incivility problem. Has social media made conversation less civil? And in all these debates, we ensured that we had speakers from the United States as well as the UK. So, for example, our opening speaker was Emily Sidnor from Southwestern University, Texas. She was joined by Teresa Bejan, who was in Oxford, but had also been at Columbia, New York. And they took a fascinating argument about civility, disagreements, and the limits of toleration. Teresa's particular hero, actually, is Roger Williams, the founder, of course, of Rhode Island, of Providence, Rhode Island. And in the aftermath of the US presidential election of 2020, asked about Williams and his means of containing intolerance by offering a means for all views to be expressed temperately. We had David Howarth, speaker also, former MP from Cambridge. And in a second session, fascinatingly, when we asked about whether there was a predisposition to offensiveness, and Dr. Hannah Critchlow, a neuroscientist from Cambridge, led a debate, again, with a former MP, someone who'd been engaged in very difficult public debates, Heidi Allen. And I'm delighted to say our next speaker on this panel, your former chairman, Paul Beresford-Hill, joined us as well. And in a third one, we looked at why do we debate? And this was the culmination of our program online, which I think was really an extraordinarily splendid finale. Katie East, who's designed a course in a history department at Newcastle University called Rules of Engagement, which introduces students to the history of debating in order to offer positive examples of debate. And we were joined from the US by Christopher Peterson, professor of law at Utah, who was then standing as the Democratic candidate for the governorship of Utah, and who you may remember won with his Republican rival and current Republican governor extraordinary plaudits nationally and internationally for calling for more civility in public and political discourse and a peaceful transfer of power in the 2020 US election. And they both together posted online a joint proclamation on this. And I think, as Chris Peterson wrote, I'm not sure this has ever been done before. I'm just quoting here from my notes here. But as our national political dialogue continues to decline, my opponent and I decided to try something different. We can disagree without hating each other. So I do think that Wrench would have approved of that. He was concerned about communication, effective communication, and the sharing of ideas and of moral, ethical civility as a remedy for the polarization which we all experience too much today. How we can exercise freedom of speech, not just believe in freedom of speech, but how that can be exercised and practiced, which is a key. And I'll just conclude by saying that although that's very important, and I see the harnessing of that digital technology is important to us, of course it cannot, as Pat Schroeder was saying, take away from that person-to-person intervention, of the ability to actually meet each other face-to-face, of the exchanges that still continue between ESU branches and which bring us all together. And the opportunity not just for one person to meet another person, but for a group of people, particularly young people, to be inspired. I had the great privilege of chairing John McCain many years ago. Also of Alec Douglas Hume came through to meet many young people too, of a whole range of fascinating speakers that we were able to engage people and to be inspirational. And I very much hope that that will continue. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of this. And I want to, I know Pat Schroeder was on video rather than there online, but she indeed was one of those inspirational and progressive voices for many of us in the UK in the 1980s and 1990s who heard her regularly on British evening television, and was then a voice of extraordinary importance for many of us. And it's been such a privilege not just be part of this, but also to be with Pat Schroeder in particular this evening. So, or for you this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Reid. Now we'll have Dr. Paul Beresford-Hill make his comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Quinn, and thank you, James, for a very wonderful vignette of your experiences at the English Speaking Union. I find myself at a loss for words sometimes when I hear you speak, because you speak with both authority and erudition, and it's always a pleasure to hear your words. When I received the questions about, not the questions, but the topics that we were asked to reflect on, when I was elected chair, was I involved with the ESU? Actually, I wasn't. I had very, I had very, very limited exposure to the ESU, having worked with the ESU years back on the Shakespeare competition, then fast forwarding into the 1990s, when I then at the end of the 90s moved away into Thailand and lived abroad. And by the time I came back, the ESU had changed quite a bit. And I was asked to start attending some of the Shakespeare competition finals at Lincoln Center, which I hadn't really been a part of for many years. and seeing the way in which the competition had grown and expanded and how it had unified the branches around the country really I found very, very, very exciting. And I then became involved again with the New York branch, and very quickly thereafter found myself taking on the role of chairman. Was the ESU that I took on board, the ESU that I remembered, that I had previous experience of? And actually, no. It was a very, very different organization, and it was different in two ways. It was different in that I had been unaware of the expansion of the ESU in the overseas and international areas. I learned as I moved through the years of my tenure the way in which, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, how so many of the former Soviet bloc countries had decided to ditch Russian as their second language and to take on board English as the new lingua franca, and how this had created new opportunities for the English-speaking Union to grow and expand in many, many countries and parts of the world which had no prior connection with the British Commonwealth, or had very, very little opportunity to have much to do with the English-speaking globe. So that was one area where I became extremely excited, because I am an internationalist. International education and international life is very much a part of who and what I am. And this was a whole new opener for me as far as the ESU was concerned. The other area that I found very interesting, and which I had really known very little about, was the degree to which it was really the branches around the United States which had created and developed and evolved the English-speaking Union over many decades in its 100-year history. And how those branches, some of which had been huge and significant in terms of their numbers, their membership, their participation, their contribution to the work of the organization, were merely being kind of stage managed a little from the New York office. And I observed how over time things had changed and shifted, and some branches had closed, the numbers had shrunk. New York and the office had become, I think, more prominent in the organization and the administration of the ESU. And so these were all areas where there was change and where there was evolution that was happening. So taking on some of those challenges has been very interesting. I would say exciting in the sense of taking a William Shatner ride into outer space, which might actually be something we could think about later on. But I will say, from the point of view of seeing and observing and being a part of the evolution and the growth of the English-speaking Union to the point where it is now, I take great satisfaction in having had the opportunity to work with some tremendously talented, visionary, and highly committed people on the board of the ESU, on the staff of the ESU, both here in New York, but also internationally. And I do believe that the organization is really poised for really great things. Outside internal challenges, where do we go from here? How do we address the challenges? Well, I tend not to necessarily focus too much on the past and the problems of the past. They're known, they're experienced, they've existed, and we've moved on. But I think in moving on, we have to be very much aware of the fact that we don't necessarily want to make the same mistakes again. And so institutional history and having a good idea and sense of what works and what doesn't work is very important. But that shouldn't at the same time stop us from seeking new ways forward. When I think about, the biggest challenges facing us as the human race, Evelyn Wrench, the more I learn about him and about his life and about his personality, the more I wish I'd actually had a chance to meet him, because I think he would have been a fascinating person to talk to. I said earlier today that he was noted as being fairly shy. He certainly didn't suffer fools easily, and I think he tended to keep his counsel in some areas, but at the same time, he was definitely a person who strove to put vision into reality, and his legacy in the English-speaking world is surely a testament of the success with which he. Through the creation of the Overseas League and through the creation of the English-speaking Union, all of those things were caused by change, which had very often a human origin. The First World War was very much a product of humanity's inability to deal with humanity. As we move on from that interregnum to 1939, we see another occasion where mankind creates this huge change and this huge kind of rupture within the world, which has ramifications that spread everywhere, to every country and in every part of the globe. And ideas and workers and visionaries like Evelyn Wrench have tried in their own way to create solutions, to create antidotes, to create salves, to try and heal and to lead us forward. In the past 3 years in my work at the United Nations, it's become increasingly clear to me that the biggest challenge that we're facing now has nothing to do right now with humans. We may have created the emissions problem and we may have created, but the effects and the progress of climate change is something which is out of our hands. The more I read, the more I hear reports from experts, and even those that have some skepticism, the more I realize that these are challenges which are confronting us, which we are being put to the pin of our collar as a human race to try and resolve and to solve effectively. I attend many commission meetings of organizations such as the Small Island States. These are a group of UN countries which basically face extinction. These are islands like the Maldives, which currently holds the chair of the General Assembly. But this is an island state that perhaps in 30, 40, 50 years will not exist anymore. It will be washed away. We're looking at the Thames Barrier and the fact that at the moment it's holding, but with rising tides, with rising sea levels, the chances are that the investment that's going to have to be made in order to keep London from going under is absolutely gigantic. I mean, it's a huge amount of effort and endeavor. These are the problems which organizations like ours must in some way address and must in some way try to push solutions for, push if nothing else, awareness of. And this is why I was so thrilled when we received approval from the United Nations to have the English-speaking Union as an NGO, as a member of ECOSOC, with the right and responsibility of being able to attend General Assembly meetings, because I see this as a way in which not only is it status for the ESU, maybe, maybe not, but what it does for us, it gives us access. It gives us access to information. It gives us a recognition within the international community that we have something to contribute, we have something to say, and what we can do, if nothing else, is to communicate back to our members, back to our communities, back to Kansas, back to Atlanta, back to Miami, back to New York, back to Tbilisi, Georgia, back to Stockholm, back to Madrid. We need to communicate more, and we have a vehicle for doing that with our international branches of the ESU. And what I'm proposing is that we establish a program which we can base out of New York, because obviously that's where the UN is, although we do have access to, and we are entitled to participate at the UN in Geneva and also in Vienna. That is included in our kind of package. But my idea is that we should provide some modest scholarship opportunities for graduate students in international business to affiliate themselves with the English-speaking Union, and from their base in the ESU, as an adjunct activity as part of their studies at Columbia or NYU or any of the New York universities, that they would be assigned to look at and to study and to review some of the activities and events going on at the United Nations, which they would have full access to, and that they should write reports. And those reports, information, communiques from the UN through the English-speaking Union would then be posted on a website which we will create and which will go out to all our branches all over the world. It'll go to schools in England, it'll go to schools in Georgia, it'll go to schools in Russia, it'll go to schools and colleges and branches all over the United States. The idea is to highlight discussion points, highlight information. A lot of that can be focused on perhaps one key area, which is sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals in relation to climate change. I mean, that's a huge topic in and of itself, and one which lends itself to that level of communication so that people are informed as to how people are thinking on the international scene and what kinds of solutions, ideas, and hopes and aspirations that they're putting forward to make our planet a better and a safer place. Anyway, sorry, I'm kind of rabbiting on a bit, but when I think of my time at the ESU, I am just so grateful that you, the members of the American ESU of the United States, entrusted me with this responsibility. I hope I haven't let you down. I hope I've done some of the things that you wanted me to do. I know that the future is very bright. The future is very hopeful for our organization, and it'll only be so, and it'll only continue to be so as long as we make it so. So let's use this wonderful opportunity of our annual conference to strike that note of unity within the English-speaking Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We have 10 minutes for questions from the audience. So please send in your questions. I think Josh is going to take those. While we're waiting, I might ask a question for Professor Raven and Paul. What are the one or two things that you are most proud of during your tenure as chairman?
Shall I go first? I think I heard you say two things that I'm proud of. I think the ability to keep our young people in both in the participation with the ESU and in their competitions going, even if it had to be online and in a completely different way. And I was thinking actually while Paul was speaking, how extraordinarily impressive the subjects, the topics which those young people speak about are these days. There's a tremendous moral and ethical edge to the subjects that they choose to discuss. And I think that's enormously hopeful for the future. So I'm very proud of that. And the second thing I think is that in very, very difficult times in which we had to really rein in what we were doing because of resource questions, that the staff and the volunteers were able to keep going as well, and that we now look, we hope, fingers crossed, to a much brighter period ahead when we can resume activities in the way that we would want to.
Thank you for the question, Quinn. When I think back to the past 6 years, there is something of a kaleidoscope because so much went on and so much happened over those 6 years. I would probably say that I'm very happy. Proud isn't really a word I want to use because it's irrelevant. But I am very, very happy that the organization has moved in strength. Maybe we haven't got as many members as we would like to have, we would want to have, but I do notice a real movement of activity, support, and enthusiasm coming from the branches, which I really, really feel is a great source of strength for us as an organization moving forward. I'm so proud of the work that's been done with the Andrew Romay Center, and I know, Quinn, that you were one of the people who really got that underway when it started. But going to their events and their activities and talking to these young migrants, many of them who came with professions which were unusable because they didn't have the skill to pass the exams for this or the exams for that, and to be able to give them those skills and give them that language to push them forward and to give them satisfying lives. I think that is a tremendous opportunity which the ESU has given. And I think one of the looking at highlights of the time that I've had, one of the highlights actually was giving the eulogy at the funeral services for Andrew Romay, because I didn't really know much about his life other than the anecdotal things that I had been told and that people had shared with me. But I did some research before I spoke, and I learned so much about what this man had suffered, what his family had suffered, what they had endured during the Holocaust, and how man's inhumanity to man had basically attempted to destroy them and their family and everyone around them that they loved. And yet they came through, and they came through with faith and vision and a desire to change, a desire to turn things around again. And the fact that this man made it in America, became successful, and allocated those resources which he had gathered together to help other young people from all religions, all races, help them get their feet on the ground through the English language. That was humbling. That was really humbling.
Are there any other questions? I think, Josh, you are monitoring the questions.
Yes, so there are no other questions that have been submitted. If to submit a question, you should use either the chat box or the Q&A module that is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. But at this moment, we don't have any questions from the audience.
Well, I might ask another for you. Is there something the ESU did or didn't do, like take on a program, in hindsight that you would have wanted to pursue?
I'm terribly sorry. I couldn't quite hear the question. Can you repeat it?
Sure. Is there something that the ESU did or didn't do, like take on a program that in hindsight that you would have wanted to pursue?
I think I've got the question. I'm so sorry. That is there something that we shouldn't have pursued, or you didn't want to?
Let me see if I can help here. I believe Quinn's asking: is there something that the ESU did or didn't do, such as taking on a program, canceling a program, that in hindsight you would not pursue?
That's a very interesting. It's a challenging question. I think that it's not so much an individual program. For example, there were questions about the extension perhaps of our Shakespeare program at one point, our Shakespeare competition, which has been a huge success, but which has been very, very important, I think, to develop, and which has been so important in the United States as well, as I know. And there were questions raised about the development of other specific programs and activities. It's not so much the individual event or activity, but a question actually of scale. And I think that one of, and I speak personally here, but I think I speak for others as well, is that sometimes there can be too great an ambition to scale things up and to take too much on, rather than concentrating on targeted activity. So, for example, the huge success of some of our programs. Miles was talking about Oracy, of our Discover Your Voice program of debate in the classroom programs in schools in the United Kingdom, and indeed of the wonderful international public speaking competition, which brings together not just ESU international ESUs around the world, which aren't incidentally branches, but in individual ESU entities in those countries, brings those together, and many young people from outside are targeted in specific areas. And I think that is an important thing to develop, rather than trying to be too ambitious and say we're going to have an exceptional coverage when we haven't actually got the resources to do that. So the importance, I think, is quality sometimes rather than quantity.
Yeah, I think, that's a good, that's a very, very good example. When I think back, I suppose, I regret that we did not have the resources or the, I won't say motivation, but the drive perhaps to replicate more the Andrew Romay program in other parts of the United States. I've always felt that it would definitely have lent itself to areas like Seattle, areas like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Miami, some other parts of the United States which have large immigrant populations. And many of those young immigrants and not so young immigrants have professions which they need to develop in the United States. So we've been very successful with that program, and of course its parent program, English in Action, in the New York branch, and English in Action in other parts of the country. But I've always hoped that we would at some point be able to develop the Rome program in more targeted sites around the country, and obviously work with more people.
I think if I could add one more thing, actually, and that is it's really outside our control. So it's not so much something that I regret with regard to the ESU in terms of what the board and the staff were doing, but that is the curtailment of some of our hospitality programs of necessity. We're not the only charity or organisation have been affected by this, but many of our branches were extraordinarily successful in hosting young people coming over for public speaking competition or in people-to-people exchanges, which I was a great beneficiary when I went to the then ESU branch of New Brunswick, New Jersey, which was just wonderful and a life-changing experience. And those life-changing experiences were curtailed because of the new regulations in terms of safeguarding and of so many procedures that people had to have, quite rightly and understandably. And so our hospitality programs were no longer allowed to function in the way that they had. And I suppose the regret is that we haven't found a way yet fully to get around that or to continue those programs in the same way.
So we do have some questions that have come in through our audience. So the first question is actually from Jane Easton, Director General of the ESU, who asks, what would each of you ask, or what would you ask of each individual member as a call to action following this conference?
Paul? A call to action. Well, I mean, I would hope that that as a consequence of the discussions which we're having and which we will continue to have over the course of this weekend, there will be issues and things which are raised, which hopefully will have relevance to individual. Certainly, I'm looking now at the United States, to individual branches, and I'm hoping that those participating from within the United States will take back an agenda of discussion items, of action items, which will emerge from the course of this weekend to share with their colleagues and their friends, and which we will then hopefully then be able to put into operation as we move forward.
Well, I'm not getting out of it, but Jane's question is a wonderful question, because the answer, I think, is quite simply, and I'm not skirting it. It is actually participation. The call to action is actually to act. We have our wonderful membership and wonderful volunteers. I was giving some examples there of what people did in our difficult years during lockdown through the Festival of Speaking and other enterprises. And really, it's to make sure that if you're a member of a branch, it's actually to participate, to make sure that you are active within that branch and support the nationally directed programs, but also local initiatives as well. So it's really just the call to action is to be active.
Well, carrying on from those very, very words, I just have a quote here from Sir Evelyn Wrench. And he said this in one of his publications. Let each section of the English-speaking world have its own brand of political system, and sooner or later, I was convinced that once our peoples really knew each other, this community of thought would produce a community of action. So spot on.
We're also entering a world of this word I used, of hybridity. This is going to be a new experience for us. The ability to cross time zones, as we're doing at the moment, to bring people together in a way which accorded with Evelyn Wrench's vision, and yet also embrace what we were also saying, and that is still the person-to-person contact as well. And that's going to be a challenge for us when we have our speaker events, to be able to show and doing what we're now doing, to be able to have people speaking, but also to have an audience out there. And there's all sorts of interesting issues about that, because I can't see the audience at the moment. I can see the other speakers. How do we get over that? How do we maintain that? So there's a lot of thinking to do about that. And so one of the challenges for us, and I hope, as a call to action, there'll be members thinking about this, is how all of us overcome those issues and create an ideal hybridity whereby we can, so that when Mary McAleese gives, for example, her wrench lecture in a few weeks' time in London, people participating on screen as well as actually being there in person can feel to be part of that community and can feel to be engaged in the way which we in the ESU would like us all to be engaged. That's a challenge.
Also, I think your mention of hybridity perfectly segues into Jeff Schnabel's question, who's our president in Kansas City, who I'm just going to read his entire, even though some of it's exposition, but what a perfect opportunity with both US and Commonwealth chairmen present. This might be a chance to suggest sharing branch events internationally, both US branches and all branches throughout the world, either live, online, or recorded. It would give branches across the world a means to learn more about ESU programming internationally.
Yes, absolutely. That's a tremendous comment and question. And I suppose going back to the question of regret, resources were so stretched, still are so stretched, that it's very difficult to do everything that you want to do. But I do think that going forward, and with the International Council meeting coming soon in December, there's an opportunity to debate how we can go forward internationally in this way, in exactly the way in which we can share and bring more people into each other's events and meetings. And we've already got the extraordinary, wonderful example of the International Public Speaking Competition for young people, and we've been able to share other events. We did. Some of you will know that early on as a fundraiser, and I think it was just before the pandemic. Actually, it was simply as a digital exercise. We launched the reading of a Shakespeare sonnet, going all around the world, in which one member of an ESU in one country took a line, and we read Shakespeare's sonnet starting in London and going right the way around the world, through Russia, India. A line was read in Australia. People had to sort of sit up in the middle of the night for that and come around to South America and the US. An extraordinary example of how you circle the world, not, as was said by someone in a spacecraft, but actually by simply reading something online, one to the other. Now, those sorts of things, I think, have all sorts of exciting possibilities for us in the future, but they do need resourcing, and that's something which we do have to, work out going forward. But that's a wonderful question, wonderful comment.
I would concur with everything Dick said. I think that's absolutely appropriate, and I think I have nothing more to add. Nothing more to add.
Well, that's it in terms of questions from the audience. I don't think there's any other ones. I'll hand things over to Quinn.
Well, thank you, James and Paul. It's certainly been an enlightening afternoon about leadership and action at the ESU. And I think the lessons that we've gained from this are clear. We should stay true to the ESU mission, respect its history and the ethos of our organization, remain steadfast in adversity and in tough times, and to think creatively to overcome obstacles. This is valuable advice to ESU future leaders, and thank everyone else for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you during the remainder of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great privilege to be here. Thank you.
call me back.
Thank you.